Hey y'all, my name is Christina. I'm a travel lifestyle blogger, and in this video, I'll be talking about Black diasporans moving to Africa and some of the issues that I've noticed with this initiative. So in recent years, I feel like I've seen an influx of Black diasporans moving to Africa for common reasons such as wanting to escape racism, wanting to be in an environment where they feel community, seeing people like them, wanting to feel more connected to their roots, and just seeking a place where there is more safety. I do want to note that in this video, you'll hear me say Black diaspora, and what I really should have said is African diaspora because that's what I actually mean and want to focus on in this video, specifically African diasporans from Western countries. A lot of what I say can be tied to Black diasporans who are also moving to Africa, but it's more so those of African descent and ties that I wanted to focus on for this video, so just keep that in mind throughout. Some people think they are the same, but for me, I just want to make that distinction. I saw it happening heavily during the Black Lives Matter time in the US in 2020, and especially that happening after the Year of Return initiative that was called by Ghana's president at the time, where many diasporans indeed answered the call, not only in Ghana, but also in cities like Cape Town and Nairobi. However, when they get there, I believe that there are some issues that are caused due to some differences that are important for me to discuss as a member of the diaspora and as someone who once lived on the continent and has been considering returning back. Before we begin, I just want to be clear, all views are my own. This video is not an attack in any way on Black diasporans who choose to move back to the continent or are planning to. As someone who was raised and born in the States in a predominantly white environment at that, I can never blame people for wanting to go abroad or get away from it all. I know that there are a lot of people that think that Black people should stay and fight the good fight, so to speak. And this has always been a very common debate among Black people, even during Black liberation periods in the 1800s and 1900s. I personally think that people have the right to move wherever they want to, especially if it's going to bring them peace and joy. However, like with everything, there is a mindful way to do things, and I hope to discuss some of those ways in this video. Also, I am choosing to focus on Black diasporans for the purpose of those videos, specifically because it is our group of people where there has been an influx of migration to the African continent during this time period. I am aware that there are other foreigners in Africa that also contribute to some of the issues that I will be discussing in this video. It is not meant to include them, and I will briefly discuss other foreigners in Africa, but I just really want to focus on the Black diaspora given our ancestral ties to the continent and ways that we can do better. So before we can talk about the issues with Black diasporans being in Africa, we have to talk about why they are there in the first place and why they are leaving Western nations. The number one reason why I usually see Black diasporans from the West moving to Africa is racism. Growing up in spaces where you are the minority and you are constantly subject to discrimination and harassment just for the skin that you were born into is not an easy thing. Like I said, I grew up in a white predominantly area in the States, so I completely understand why people would want to leave, because it really does impact every facet of your life, and it can ultimately impact your well-being. No one wants to stay in a place where they feel like they don't belong. And not only not belonging, but just being subject to certain treatment can eventually wear you down. It's very interesting because I feel like whenever I have conversations with African citizens living on the continent, they usually have a hard time wrapping their minds around why someone would want to leave life in the West to move to Africa just because of racism. It's like racism is talked about as this thing that's like kind of very small and like it's not a big deal. Like, as long as I'm making my money, living my life, who cares what people have to say or how they treat me or if they don't like me. And I think people just do not realize, even a lot of people in the States themselves, just how systemic racism is and how ingrained it is in every aspect of life, such as education, healthcare, employment. Like, it is literally intertwined in all of the systems in a lot of Western nations, and it's just designed so that you never win, or when you do win, you just have to work 20 times as hard as your peers. So definitely can never blame anyone for wanting to get away from that type of environment. Number two, many Black diasporans just seek wanting to be in a place or an environment where they feel like they belong. Growing up in Western nations also often means being the minority, and sometimes they just want to see what it feels like to not be a minority, to walk into a grocery store or go to school or go to any type of facility and just see people that look like you and be the majority for the first time in their lives. There's no question about whether or not people are mistreating you because of the color of your skin or whatnot, but you know that you are in a place where you belong. You see people that look like you all the time, and it's just a priceless feeling. The third common reason that I see for diasporans leaving has to do with safety. There can be a lot of safety issues with Western nations, especially as it pertains to gun laws and regulations, and just how you really don't know when you step out of your house what is going to happen that day. And so a lot of people feel that fleeing to African nations where, you know, gun violence is not an everyday thing or is not the norm, although there might be other crimes, gives them peace of mind. So I often share how I lived in Ghana for 2 years while doing my master's degree, and that was a time period for me that was very transformative. I think I was in Ghana when I was in my younger 20s, so I had so many of my firsts on the continent, and it was just such a beautiful experience. What a lot of people don't know is the why behind how I chose to do grad school in Ghana, and I hope to do another video on my experience because it was so great and just such a unique opportunity. But when I was choosing grad school, you guys, it was the height of the Black Lives Matter movement in the United States. If you know anything about the Black Lives Matter movement, you know that this was a time where in over 500 places in the US, there were a lot of protests with people basically protesting against the unjust treatment, discrimination, and racism against Black people in the US, which was sparked by George Floyd's death in May 2020. At this time period, I feel like was a bit scary for a lot of Black people because tensions were very high in the US. There were a lot of protests, a lot of businesses coming out in support of this side and that side, a lot of people that just could not wrap their heads around the Black Lives Matter concepts and then tried to make it all lives matter. So there was just a lot going on at that time. And as someone who's studying international relations, I feel like a lot of people wanted me to go to school in DC, but you guys, I just did not want to be in the States at that time. I feel like tensions were really high and I really just wanted to be out. I was in a very predominantly white conservative town and it was a lot for me, and that's part of the reason how I made my decision to go back to Ghana to study. So with that being said, those are some of the common reasons why people leave, and you can see kind of how those things have impacted their everyday life and well-being, and so I don't blame them for wanting to go. Now, what I do believe is that once you get on the continent, you do have a responsibility of some sort of making sure that you are moving in a mindful way and in a way that does not harm local resources or cause a burden on the local citizens of the place you are moving to, especially when you are moving with a lot of privilege. And that brings me to some of the issues that I've seen with Black diasporans moving to Africa. The first issue I would say is just the lack of genuine integration. While many diasporans arrive with the idea that, you know, they really want to connect with their roots and they're just happy to be on the continent, I do notice that there seems to be a lack of genuine integration and immersion with the local culture and the people. I think people get super excited when they first move on the continent and they want to find other people who are like them and have come from the States or the UK or, you know, any other Western nation and are kind of going through the same thing that they are. And so they form those bubbles and then they frequent certain spaces that those similar people frequent and kind of forget that, you know, there are still the local citizens, and you have to remember to not always try to maintain that Western lifestyle, but also be integrating yourself into the local culture. This is also why I feel like there are so many local citizens who kind of always view diasporans as outsiders rather than one of them, because it's very evident, or they make it evident, that they aren't one of them because they're not living in the same way. They're not getting to know how things are done a certain way. It's just living, basically taking the lifestyle that you had in the West and transferring it over to the continent instead of, you know, building a life based on what's happening in that country. And in turn, I think that lack of integration also leads to a lot of misunderstanding between diasporans and local citizens in African countries. There's actually a lot of talk going on right now about a woman, I believe, who is building a community for Black diasporans in Ghana, and there have been a lot of clashes between those diasporans and the local people. While I can understand why someone would want to take a sort of initiative to create this safe space for diasporans wanting to return and come back and just kind of build their own community for support, I'm also having a hard time understanding why it's necessary and what the end goal is, because if we are not careful, we can also have a Liberia 2.0 situation, and I think this is a great example of how we should learn from history so that we're not repeating the same things. If as a diasporan you are claiming to want to move to the continent to again feel connected to your people, connect with your roots, I do not think that building a community that kind of separates yourself from the local citizens is the way to do that. However, I think that's something that is super interesting, and I look forward to keeping up to see how it goes. The second issue I've seen with Black diasporans moving to Africa are the privileges and opportunities that they bring with them from the Western world to Africa that are not always acknowledged. Diasporans undeniably benefit from so many privileges, one being currency privilege, where they're usually earning in dollars, euros, and pounds, and then when they get to the continent, they have so much more of that local currency because of favorable exchange rates, right? They also have passport privilege, which means they have strong passports that allow them greater mobility around the world. They're allowed to go in and out. They can just kind of touch down in many African countries with little to no preparation, little to no rules or regulations, if we're being honest. Can kind of stay as they please, etc. Whereas those from African nations, we know often do not have those same benefits and privileges, and it's not as easy for them to just move around as they please due to things like visas. This means that whether diasporans want to admit it or not, whether we want to admit it, we have privileges that make our lives easier on the continent. We have more money, and that does not mean that everyone is rich, because that is also not the case, but we do have that privilege of having more money in the local currency. This also means that many diasporans move to the continent and are usually living a life that is a bit more grand than they would live back home, or just separates them in terms of class. I think on the continent, most of us can agree that classism is very apparent, and you can kind of see who has the money and who doesn't because of the type of spaces that they frequent, neighborhoods, and things like that. And number three, the third issue I would say with Black diasporans moving to Africa has to be sometimes the poor treatment of local citizens. Despite shared racial and ancestral ties, I do have to admit that Black diasporans can sometimes play a role in bringing certain Western ideologies to the continent that in turn lead to them kind of looking down on the local people and exhibiting the same types of behaviors that they were trying to escape in that Western nation that they're from. This can lead to having a lot of condescending attitudes towards locals, and even being exploitative when it comes to business practices and other things. When I was living in Ghana, I even had someone once ask me why Black Americans treat Ghanaians poorly, or the same way that white people would treat them in the States. And honestly, it was really sad, because what the person was perceiving, or what we were perceiving, was not wrong per se in that particular moment and situation. And it's just unfortunate that that is the viewpoint that they have. But again, it's not wrong, because that sort of thing is taking place. And it's obviously not everyone, but you know, when you do get those few bad apples in the bunch, like that can easily become the narrative for everyone, or the reputation. So I just think it's important that we are also mindful of how we are thinking and how we are treating people when we do get on the continent. I did want to cover other foreigners in Africa very briefly and the role that they play. Africa is very rich in resources, whether people want to admit it or not. Africa has so many resources, and so as a result, everyone kind of wants a piece of Africa. And over time, the continent has attracted investors from Europe, from Asia, with China being very heavy in Africa, and many Middle Eastern countries. I personally remember being so surprised when I visited Ghana and there were so many Lebanese-owned businesses and even Chinese-owned businesses. While foreign investment isn't inherently bad, we all know that sometimes it's not favorable for those living in Africa. The profit from those investments are most likely taken from the continent and then poured back into other nations, right? With that being said, I think there's a lot of conversation with Black diasporans being the one who are kind of raising prices for locals on the continent, and a lot of people being upset that that's being said, when the reality is that it's really a broad influx of foreigners from all over, but again, especially Western nations who do come with those privileges of having more currency and certain passports that can make prices go up from locals and cause issues like gentrification. While I do believe that the responsibility should be placed in the hands of those at the government level, I do think that Black diasporans are also always tied into this conversation, again, because of the ancestral ties that we have and the ability that we have to make an impact and genuinely plant roots in Africa. So with all that being said, I would say the main issue here is just the fact that Black diasporans come with a host of privilege that just is not acknowledged, and that it's time to acknowledge it so that we can figure out how to use those privileges to Africa's advantage. We can't get lost in the excitement of going back home and reconnecting with our roots while also causing or contributing to the harm that is done to local citizens because of the presence of foreigners in general. Now that I've discussed the issues, as always, I just want to kind of share some tips or solutions that I've brainstormed very briefly that I think could help contribute to the issue, or at least bridge some gaps, big or small. Number one, don't shut yourself out from the locals. I already talked about how I feel like Black diasporans can unintentionally kind of build a bubble when they're moving on the continent. And so if you are moving on the continent, aim not to do this. Try to live in an area where it's not just a bunch of expats or other Black diasporans who have moved there, so that you know you're not in a little bubble, but try to live somewhere that's populated with more local people so that you're able to have those conversations, build connections and meaningful relationships. That is one of the most beautiful parts about living on the continent, is that it is so easy to talk to people. People are so friendly, willing to share their experiences and their knowledge with you. So take advantage of that and try not to put yourself in a bubble. That way too, you'll be exposed to the everyday realities of life, and you won't just have this rosy colored view of what the place that you're moving to is like. Number two, try to support local businesses for your primary needs. So one of the first things that I usually do whenever I move somewhere is I make a list of everything that I do, all services, whether it's beauty services, things that I need done around my house or my apartment. And then I try to see who in like the local community I can hire for that thing, or what business I can support, so that my money is going towards local people of that place and then able to recirculate within the local economy. Instead of relying on international brands or even services like Amazon, try not to use Amazon and to go outside and find people that can do those services, right? Support the people that are in your new home. As a diasporan from the Western world, the beauty in that is that there are so many advantages that you are coming with and privileges that you are bringing on the continent that you can use for good. I always say with a lot of privileges, some people are born with certain privileges, and because you are from the West and you do benefit from things like currency and passport privilege, it doesn't mean to be ashamed of it, but rather use it to your advantage and use it to help other people. In this case, you can think about how to use your resources to collaborate with the locals. Maybe there's someone who has a particular business and you know someone in the West who's looking to invest in certain initiatives, and you can connect those two people to, help that business grow. Maybe it's hiring people at a higher wage than what is typical in that local society, because you know that it's very low, not just when converted to dollars, but in the local currency too, but you're coming with a bit more so you can do a bit more for others. Maybe it's filling a void or bridging the gap in some type of initiative in the community that is needed and that would help the lives of many families in a certain community. whatever it is or whatever you choose to do, if there is a need, you know, the point is to kind of use what you have or use those privileges from the West to kind of help here on the continent. So those are my thoughts about Black diasporans moving to Africa and some of the issues I've seen, as well as some solutions. I hope that you found this video useful and you enjoyed hearing some of my perspectives. Let me know what you think in the comments, even if you completely disagree with something that I said. Let me know why you disagree. Give me a different perspective to consider. I love when people do that. You know, this is an ongoing conversation, so nothing that I said is to be right. I don't aim to be right. I just aim to have discussions. Let me know if you are planning to move to the continent and what countries you've been considering in Africa. Let me know what your overall thoughts are about being a diasporan. I have the written version of this video on my blog, of course, being ChristinaJane.com, so you have that. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so that you don't miss out on some of my future opinion videos, and I will see you guys in the next one.